Okay, so let's start with the journey here. So, can you say your name and your background and then why you all chose to homeschool?
I'm Brandy, and we have four boys ranging in age from 12 to 1. So we have lots of things going on in our home. My background is in engineering and in secondary education. My husband and I met on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. He worked on the operations side, and I worked on the engineering side. And and he was from Tennessee. So that's how I ended up in Tennessee. Is when we decided that we were going to get married, I left the oil field and I came to Tennessee, and that's when I got my master's, because my background was in petroleum engineering. So there's not a lot of petroleum engineering here in Tennessee. So I moved over to education. I wanted to try some teaching. And so when I started out, I had no idea. I just wanted to teach. I wanted to teach other people's children, and I wanted to impact the world. And I didn't realize that ever, it was not on my radar at all that we were going to homeschool. I knew we were going to have children, but I didn't realize that that was where God was leading my heart in the whole process of everything. So we had a few career transitions after our first two children were born. And I was teaching in middle school and high school mathematics. And then we moved to Houston because I had an opportunity to work in engineering again. And my husband became a stay-at-home dad at that point and stopped rotating offshore. And so it was during that year, that was 2008, that was my pivotal year. That's whenever God worked on my heart. And that's when we ended up having, our third son was born down in, he's our only Texan. and, and that was when I realized that I just wanted to be home. And it wasn't until after I came home, Gary went back to work offshore, that it was about 2 or 3 months after that God planted it in our hearts that we wanted to homeschool. How we were going to go about it, we didn't know. But Stephen, our oldest, was in kindergarten in public school, and it just wasn't a good fit for him. He's a very intellectual child, and he loves history and geography, and those are things that they didn't talk about. And so there were lots of reasons, but we ended up, okay, we're going to homeschool. So in that survival mode, I had a baby at the time, and my husband went back to work offshore, so we were transitioning. And so I didn't know what I was going to do, so I just got the whole slew of a Becca program, and we were just going workbook, 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 and that's it. Okay, and so we got to the end. That year was when we moved back to Tennessee. So we were still in Houston at the time. We moved back to Tennessee, and so Stephen was a first grader then. And that is when I had the email come across that there was a way to connect with other people. And because we didn't know, we ended up parking ourselves in the middle of Tennessee, where we don't have any family at all. We're in the middle of friends and family here. And so about 4 hours away both ways. So I decided to go and meet somebody that told me a little bit about classical conversations. And all I wanted was community. I wanted, because I'm kind of social, and I was going crazy. We didn't have anybody here, and there was we were in a very rural area. After coming from Houston, we came to a county that had a population of like 20,000 people. And so we just didn't have a lot here to go from. And so that's how we landed on classical conversations. And so it was just, we stumbled upon it, and I had no idea what classical education was. And that was just, it was a blessing. And I didn't realize how much of a blessing it was until we got into it a couple of years into it. And I was like, this is exactly what we want. And so that's kind of the story of how we ended up here.
Wow, that's awesome. And so now you are the famous blog author of Half a Hundred Acre Woods. Is that correct?
Yes.
So tell me, how did that, how did you transition from, not having a clue about homeschooling or classical education, and then boom, transitioning into homeschooling and classical conversations, and then starting that process of blogging? How did that happen?
it's another, it's so funny and humbling how I've stumbled along. um, we, when we first moved here, and Gary he was rotating offshore. He ended up being transferred at that time. Was that Tanzania? He ended up transferring, and he was on a 28 and 28 schedule. So he's home 28 days and gone 28 days, thereabouts. And I was looking for a way to better connect with him. At the end of each day, somebody would ask me, well, you homeschool, what do you do? Or, I mean, even at the end of each year, I'm like, well, we worked through this certain book. I couldn't remember what we did at the end of every day. And so it was funny because a friend of mine had started blogging about nature walks that she was taking. And so I thought, well, that might be a good tool. But really, the first blog post I ever wrote was because I wanted a discount on Shutterfly. So that was the first one I wrote. And then after that was a couple months before I wrote anything else. And then I thought, well, this is the way I can connect with my husband. We could chronicle our journey, and I could say, yeah, this is what we did. I'll just go check. And then I started, that was the time in my life when I wanted to do all this extra exploring and flesh out the memory work we were doing. And so that's when I started compiling links of stuff, and I held it on our blog because that was the easiest way for me to keep something that we were going to use. And then, and so really it wasn't intentional. I never considered myself a blogger. When somebody introduces me as a blogger, I still don't, because I don't fit, I don't actually pursue it that way. I break all the rules. I don't do what I'm supposed to do as a blogger to be a professional one. So I just use it as an outlet. I use it as a way to connect with others. And that has been a huge blessing, because not only does it connect me with my husband, it has connected me with a whole lot of other people. And I love people. And so that's, it's been a huge blessing to me, but it only exists, and it's only grown because of God. That is the only reason. It is not because of me at all, because like I said, I don't do what I'm supposed to do with blogs. So anyways, it's just God's hand in it, and it's been wonderful.
Amen. How long ago did you start it, and how many followers or subscribers do you have at this point?
Let's see, we started CC in 2010. I wrote that Shutterfly post in December of 2010 so I could get that discount, right? And I started actually blogging, I think, in February or March of 2011. I have not even checked how many subscribers I have. The only number I know is that on Facebook there are over 10,000 people that like the page. That's a God thing. That amazes me. But as far as who subscribes, like who receives it in their email or any of the other things that they might, I really don't know. A couple thousand? I'm not sure. And so the only number I come across, because it's right there on the page, because I don't look at that anymore. At one time I did, but I don't anymore. I don't have time, and I don't really, I just lay it in God's hands and just pray that He uses it however He would like. So
that's awesome. So obviously God is the driver and the connector. Is there anything else that you feel has impacted the reason it has been so impactful to so many?
I share from my heart. It means a lot to me to be honest, and to not ever have someone, we fall into temptations as homeschooling parents to compare ourselves with other people. And I never want somebody to look at something that I've done or something I put together as a plan and think that that's what we did, because a plan is just a plan. But you know what? I find out more and more every year. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. I'm constantly reminded of that. And I've grown just by sharing and being honest. It helps me. And I think that's one reason why some people will contact me, that some people will share something from their heart about something they're going through, because I don't ever want to put on some sort of fake view of what homeschooling is like. But it's a joy anyways. Like in the midst of it all, it's still a joy, but it's hard. Homeschooling's hard work. And so I think that's an important message to get across. I share other things. Like whenever I come across something and I'm like, okay, this is something I want to do for our family, I'll make something, I don't know, handwriting pages or something that I put together. And so if it's something that I feel like can be shared with others, that it might help someone else, then I'll post it on the blog too. And so that way it doesn't the hours I invested in it for our family can be multiplied and maybe someone else can use it. And so that's always my hope, is if I put the effort into something, I want as many people to be able to use it as possible. So those are kind of the two things. That's really, I guess, all that I can think of that I do, that maybe that's why people read what I have to. I'm always floored at people reading my blog. So I'm blessed by it. So I'm thankful.
What would you say is the best homeschooling advice you have ever received?
I guess it came through the best homeschooling advice I have received has been just not to compare yourself or your children with others. I think that's been foundational, because I spent my entire educational upbringing being compared against others. But we are more than output. We are souls. We're living forever for God's glory. And so eternity matters a whole lot more than output. And so I guess that would be the best advice I've received, that I've done the most with, and the one that I have to keep reminding myself of, because I fall into those temptations of comparison. But I would build upon that and say, our children are relationships. They're not just output. And I have to remind myself of that, because I am a check the box type of person. But more important than checking the box is virtue. And more important than which curriculum you're using is a love of God and a love for others. If love is not the root of what you're doing, then what is it? What are you doing? Like, what does it matter in the end? If they can express themselves well, you want them to do it for the glory of God. Because if they don't, then they're going to be able to demolish a lot. And so you really have to think about the roots of where you're planted. And this is very convicting for me, because sometimes I don't feel like I've got that, Sometimes I feel like maybe I've sacrificed piety for success, like my children were successful at this, but to what end? And that's what I have to keep reminding myself of. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily advice as much as just remind yourself of these things. Post them somewhere where you can look at them and say, okay, yes, this is where I have to do it almost every day, or, several times through the day, to remind myself of where we're headed in our homeschooling journey, and for eternity.
That is awesome. That is amazing, and such a powerful and poignant reminder through our journey. I mean, that's so true, and I love what you said there. That that was our grid. I think one of my biggest challenges, in even observing and watching other homeschooling families within classical education, is trying not to look at the classical model and our kids through our public school grid. How do you encourage yourself?
Okay. When we are going through a tough time, which is usually this time of year, it's our third lap. The third lap is always the hardest. You don't see the end in sight yet. You don't see the finish line, and you're worn out. And you came back from Christmas break, and it's like hard to get cranked up at the middle of the year, in the middle of your books or wherever you might be. And so a lot of times when I reach this point, I will change gears, and I will focus more on true, beautiful, and lovely things. I will add more. I will sacrifice some things, because you can't do everything, so you have to find a balance. So I'll sacrifice some things. We may cut back a little bit on a certain subject and focus more, not completely, but focus more on bringing in classical music study, or artwork, or poetry. We'll start memorizing some poetry, which is something I try to do that a little bit throughout our year, but I crank it up this time of year because we'll do some crafty type projects, or something that ties in with classical music or the fine arts, because those are true and beautiful and lovely things, and our children love to do those types of things. So it kind of depends on what your family's bent is as well, but I know what gets our family going. And so that's one thing that I try to pull in. Now, as far as me as a mom, I read and I try to connect with others. Right now we have in our community, we have 2 book clubs. We're doing the core every other, second Tuesday of every month, and Teaching from Rest the 4th Tuesday of Wednesday. I can't even get my days straight. But anyways, I probably messed that all up, but there's 2 times a month that we meet, and we're doing Teaching from Rest, which is more like that personal, spiritual thing that we all need to connect with. And then we're also doing the core, and so that is kind of the academic side, and it's been a great balance for our community. Then on top of that, we have some other, I connect with some others on some of the other books that we're reading, but I don't. These are like slow reading that I'm going through right now. And then I may pick up another book. So I read a lot, or at least I try to. And then I try to go back over the scriptures that I've written down in my journal. Or, I used to have a word wall. I would use Post-it notes, and I would post them everywhere. I haven't done it in our house here, but back in Houston, it was on the inside of a cabinet door. And so I would have these scriptures, and of course, many plans are in a man's heart, but his Lord's purpose prevails. Those types of scriptures would just be posted on the inside of the cabinet. And so that was something that was like my word wall. That's where I would go and get the encouragement that I needed. And so, so I'd say the scriptures, reading, meeting with others. The reading is not nearly as enjoyable unless I can talk to somebody about it. I'm really into talking to people about what I'm reading. And so for our community, we actually don't prepare to come. We come and read it together. And that way we don't have the extra stress to try to get something done before our book club. You just come ill prepared. We'll just talk through it, and it's been great, a great encouragement, great way to build each other up too, and especially this time of year. So those are some of the things that I do to get me through the hard times.
Those are excellent ideas, excellent and practical, excellent suggestions and recommendations there. How have you all enjoyed Classical Conversations?
We don't love Classical Conversations because it's perfect, okay? I love Classical Conversations because first and foremost, the overarching mission is to know God and make Him known. Now, how that plays out, it's really hard when you're looking at a foundations guide, when you've just got the foundations guide and you don't have any children in the upper grades, upper levels yet. It's hard to understand where does that come from, okay? And so it's been something that I've grown into, and why is because I am in a community, okay? The community is so important because if I'm just using a curriculum and I'm just looking at the words on a sheet of paper, that is not the relational knowing God and making Him known. The community is what attracted me first to Classical Conversations. When we moved to rural Tennessee, I did not have anyone to connect with. So that I was like, oh, community. Okay, I'll write a check. Just tell me what I need to do. That's kind of where I was. I was ready, and my children were fine. I was just needing some social interaction. And so, anyway, so it was the community. But what I didn't realize is that this community is different than a lot of the others I've been in, because we have a common vision and we have a common mission. And we are all in this together, and we're not, our community is not full of a bunch of people trying to compete against each other. We're trying to lift each other up. We share our prayer requests with each other and those types of things. And I think that's really important too. So that is part of knowing God and making Him known, the way that you handle yourself in community and having humility and not falling into these temptations. Look at what I'm doing at home, because it's very discouraging to get in some of those comparison traps. And so the community's been really important to me. It's parents equipping parents, which is the method of CC. That means that if I don't know Latin as a parent, other parents are going to help me to get there. I don't have to have it all perfect. I don't have to know everything about Latin, even to tutor Latin, because I am a humble learner. And so all those things mean a lot to me whenever it comes to classical conversations. Those are real. It is, none of us are saying that we're experts. We're all trying to redeem our own education. From the top down, I would say from the top down. Even Lee Borton's, I would say, would agree with that statement. She's still learning. And to have people that are happy to be learning. And whenever we do run across a mistake and we say, you know what, I was wrong about that, but here's where we're going with it, And so just being willing to be humble, those are really important. And I feel like that is a part of classical conversations, even from the executive leadership team. And so the model there is you have a biblical worldview with classical tools. Now, I didn't even know anything about classical education before we went into classical conversations. But when we first decided to homeschool, we wrote down our vision. Where do we want our children to end up at the end of high school? And some of the things that we wrote down, Stephen was entering first grade. And this is what we wrote down. At the end of 15 to 20 years, we want our children to love God and have a close personal relationship with Him, know right from wrong according to absolute biblical truth, and want to do right despite the cost. Be capable of testing what they're told instead of just believing it. Love to learn and be able to teach themselves. Okay, I'm just going to stop there. I have more. But that was what our goal was, but I didn't have an education like that, so I didn't know how I was going to get there. So when we stumbled across classical conversations and we were going through this, and then I started reading some books, very important to start reading books about it, okay, that's when I started realizing, and it was probably a year into it, and I was like, this is how we're going to get there, and it was so exciting because I just, we wrote our vision, and I had no idea how we were going to get from point A, Abeka, first grade arithmetic and phonics, to this, they're changing the world for Christ type stuff. How do you get them there when you don't know, you don't have a model to follow? And then here classical conversations came in, and these are parents trying to do the same thing. And, the quantity, getting together with other people and having that common vision, that is how you can get to the next step, because you're going to have low times and you're going to need people to lift you up during that time. And so I don't know if that's a really good description, but that it's the all-encompassing. It's everything. And yeah, CC comes alongside us and supports us. I mean, we have the practicums every year. Love the practicums because it's a reset button. That's another thing that I do whenever I hit the beginning of every year. I make sure I've gone to a practicum to hit the reset button, because that will also help to encourage you in your homeschooling endeavors. So anyways.
That's awesome, ma'am. That's great. That is great. And on that last point, that very last point, you said so many neat things in there. That last point of going to a practicum each year to kind of reset, one of the things that I try and encourage parents with, and that I do myself, is as much as possible, there's information meetings, right? So January through, that begins kind of the classical conversations outreach season, is to go to an information meeting also. So if this time in a homeschooling parent's journey is kind of, represents maybe a little bit of a low point in terms of, okay, we're halfway through, we still gotta, kind of get motivated and disciplined and to continue that journey throughout the remainder of the year, this would be a great time frame to go to an information meeting by the local director or whoever the leader is that is doing, or a family member. It doesn't even have to be a leader, but just to get refreshed and encouraged and to see, okay, this is why we're doing what we're doing and the direction that we're going and the steps along the way. And just, I know for me, it's been tremendously helpful And my goal is to attend an information meeting, maybe even once a semester, just again, kind of concrete and cement that classical model in my own brain as a professional home educator. I feel like as homeschooling parents, I feel like we're professionals. This is what we do, in terms of education for our children. And so I feel like, every homeschooling family is a professional home educator. And so as part of our continuing, education units each year, our CEUs, that we, that we make that part of our own, educational journey so that we can be more effective in modeling and implementing that classical model with our children.
Now that we're in challenge, though, I want to insert this. Challenge is incredible. We're just in challenge A, but it is so different. Now, I was a math teacher in public school and in private school, and it is so completely different to walk into a challenge A math seminar. They are learning to dialogue. They are learning to work through and think hard about what does 1/2 plus 2/3 equal. I mean, that is not something that you can do in a regular school classroom. But because of the way that classical conversations is set up with the classical tools of the trivium, using the art of grammar, the art of dialectic, the art of rhetoric, because we are using, we've got that comparison. You have the whole parrot stage that connects. Those are children that are in that, they want to parrot things back to you, and that ties in with the art of grammar. And then you have the art of dialectic, which ties into the natural argumentativeness of children in that middle school age. And then you have the art of rhetoric when they're really trying to express themselves as they become high school students. And so we've actually pulled in those particular stages of development, but we've pulled them into the learning the art of. And so I find this really important to realize that it's not just grammar stage, it's art of grammar. And the art of grammar is something you will continue to use throughout your lifetime. It's a tool of learning. And so anytime that you're learning something new, you're going to learn all the vocabulary and those different things. Anytime you get to, when you get beyond that point, now you need to start using it. And so you've got the art of dialectic. And that is something we do in foundations, even with science. We ask questions. We try to apply. We're using the scientific method, And so, and then art of rhetoric, that's something we start in foundations. It's just little bitty. They're just doing show and tell as little kids. But then they move up from that, and then they get to where as it builds, as they go along, they're using these 3 arts. And then when they get to challenge, they're able to express things through through written words, and through any kind of communication, really. And so it's really a beautiful thing, because we are trying to help them to learn those arts at the particular stage when it's strongest in their lives, in their stage of development. But then it's something that we would continue to use and exercise. I mean, they're still doing art of grammar in Challenge 4. They still have grammar to learn. And so because they continue to use that, then they can, when they're launched off and they don't know something, if they have to shift careers, they can start all over again. And it's not really that intimidating, because, hey, they love learning and they know how to do it. They can tackle anything. And so that's really I went off on a rabbit trail, but that's really a beautiful thing. And that's one reason why I've grown to love classical conversations way beyond what it was at one time. Now it's like just the all-encompassing, everything that classical conversations offers us is why we love it. That's really important, an important point you made, because one of the things that we had on here is to be able to having a servant's heart and being capable of leading or following gracefully, and making sure that you're able to communicate with others, even if you differ in opinions, to do it with tact and grace. And those are really important, and especially if you ever turn on the news, it's like, I can't handle it. It's just totally different than how what we see as commonplace now. But it is part of loving others and loving God to handle others in that way. And so, I think a lot about, we look at the catalogs and we see, okay, what books are here, and what are all the things that they'll be doing at each level, and oh, I don't know if Latin is the right thing, and all these types of questions we come up with. But I really recommend everybody, even the parents that have just like a 4 or 5-year-old, I always recommend go and visit the Challenge A class at least, go visit them for 30 minutes even, and just watch how they handle themselves. The whole idea of assessment, this is just incredible to me, to listen to them. Okay, they read their paper, they practice the skills of rhetoric, but they also assess themselves and assess others, and they do it with tact and grace. They have to learn not to beat themselves up, but to also give themselves a true critique. Where can I improve? Boy, man, I need to work on that, Where can I improve without beating myself up, Those are really, and that is not something you're going to get in a curriculum, or like, it's going to be something that you get over time. It becomes a part of you. And I've seen it start in Challenge A, and I'm just looking forward to seeing it come to fruit. Like, the more they build upon something, it becomes part of who they are. And that way it'll just make them a better person. And again, just for the glory of God, it's so incredible.
So I love what you said there. Last question, ma'am. Are you all planning on homeschooling through high school? And if so, why?
We are planning to homeschool through high school because we wrote our vision for that. At the very beginning of our homeschool journey, we wrote our vision down and the reasons we wanted to homeschool. And when I am discouraged and I want to throw in the towel, I go back to my list. And now, my husband and I were going over the list yesterday, the one that I wrote in my original handwriting when we first started, and we were talking about it. I said, our vision has morphed. There are some of these that I read to you, some of the ones at the beginning, but some of the lower ones, I'm like, wow, those don't seem to be as important anymore to us. But I really am not sure if I would still be homeschooling without classical conversations, though. I needed the support. And so, yes, we will continue, the Lord willing, we will continue through high school. And I believe that the Lord is willing. I know that the Lord wants us to take care of our children and to help them grow in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. I believe that He will provide a way for anybody that has a willing heart. It's just, we also have to pray for that willing heart because it can get tough at times. But yes, we are planning to go through homeschooling all the way through high school. And we are planning to do that with classical conversations. And we just plan to grow as a family and redeem my education as well. And that's very exciting.
Yes, ma'am. That's awesome.
One thing that I don't want to neglect is that sometimes we do everything we can, but we have to remember our children are in God's hands. God has placed them in our hands, but we have to leave our hands open, and I know that, there are prodigal children. There are things, you try as you might, you try to instill in them virtue and love, but you can't hold on to them forever. And so you do your part as a parent, and you realize that they are a gift from the Lord and the Lord has them, And so I think that's really important because I don't want anybody to be at the end of the road and feel discouraged. Maybe I did something wrong or anything like that, because I realize the reality that their faith has to become their own faith. And they may go and make some really bad mistakes, but everything you do is a sacrifice at the foot of Jesus, and you just have to leave it there. And He can do mighty things regardless of what we see happen. I just believe that God is faithful, and we just want to get to the end of the road and see that God says, well done, good and faithful servant. And so we do our part, but realize that, and we do it in love, and we realize that ultimately in God's hands. And so I just want to leave that note of encouragement, if you can put that anywhere in there, because I don't want anybody to think I've got this false ideal that everything's going to be perfect because we homeschool with classical conversations, because things aren't going to be perfect. We live in a fallen world. And there's a whole lot more crying out to our children to go the wrong way than to go the right way. And so we do the best that we can.
That's right, ma'am. And I think, that's an excellent point. And I mean, God is doing that with me at my
Yes.
age now. I mean, forget about my 8.5-year-old. I mean, that's that's a daily thing that he is. I'm just thankful that he's not done with me in spite of
Yes.
all my failings and shortcomings and so to be able to, model that, with my little girl, hey, Elena, and other families and parents, like, man, God's not done with us yet, let alone,
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, because, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. But you know what? God doesn't leave us. He does not leave us. And he knows we're not perfect. That's why he sent his son, And so our hearts, I don't know, we have so much tugging at us from every direction. And I mean, as a mom, man, let's see, I mess up so many times in the course of a day. But you know what? Sometimes I think this parenthood thing is more about building character in me than in my children, because I realize how selfish I am, on a day-by-day basis. And I was reminded of that. So I gave last week, I'm a director now. Last week at CC, I've been doing these devotions, and I tie them into 12 different virtues. And so I repeat the virtues this semester. And last week was on gentleness. And my husband was gone. He was in Brazil. And that morning when we were getting ready to go, I hollered at the kids, don't break I had just broken the refrigerator door. We have one of those French doors, and it has this thing that flips in the middle, and the thing that flips in the middle broke off. And so I was trying to keep it from breaking the rest of the way because it's still connected at the bottom. And I tried to super glue the thing, but there's too much torsional force. I was like, forget it. Gary will take care of it when he gets home. So anyway, so I did. I hollered at him that morning, and I said, okay, David, don't break the door the rest of the way. And that was the extent. I mean, so we get there, and I'm over there talking about gentleness. Have you ever been on the receiving end of a raging river? And David, I have. I said, oh, yeah. And he goes, yeah, like when you yelled at me this morning. I was just like, yeah, like that, son. Thank you, child. Anyway, so the way that it all panned out in the end, I was just like, it was a little humiliating. And so I was like, let's pray. That was my out. We're just going to pray now. Okay, that's the end of the devotion. Anyway, so I offer that as a word of encouragement to you. That sometimes those, it just comes right out in the open too. So anyways, he's working on us.
Thank you so much for your time. I totally appreciate you and the skills and talents and abilities and the gifts that God's given you, and how you are using those to build up, not only your family, but literally thousands of other families across the globe. Thank you. God bless you. Bye-bye.